Jen and David. You're
First of many.
You're not even officially board members yet, although the election did certify this afternoon. We did get that confirmation, so congratulations. We'll get to your swearing in at the official board meeting in an hour. But as we told you in kind of prep last week, tonight we will be presenting the final boundary plan recommendation from the Enrollment Demographics Task Force. So this has been about a 2+ year journey that our EDTF has been on. This is the third iteration of the plan that's come forward. Lots of feedback opportunities, adjustments to the plan, etc. You had the opportunity to meet Doug last week, so Doug has worked extensively with the EDTF along with Ryan. And then we also have Stacy Russ with us tonight, who is a parent and community member in the district, who's on the EDTF, who was also a member of the smaller subcommittee that really did the heavy lifting around developing and processing the actual boundary proposals and the moving all the puzzle pieces around to develop the plan. So with that, I'll turn it over to Doug.
So we're going to sort of triple team this. So a couple of things. We handed out a PowerPoint presentation. So this is something that Doug and team we've been working on as sort of the storytelling. So we'll go over a little bit of this, and I think for most of you, I think we kind of shown drafts of this, and we believe this should be the final. The other thing that we handed out is then sort of the executive report. So I know Deanna and Carolyn and Doug have been sort of putting in a lot of late hours, trying to ensure that we have an executive report that we can also attach with the presentation that we have here. So why don't we go ahead and get started?
Okay. I want to go through a little bit of the history and context of the EDTF to put some of these things in perspective, speaking as well about some of the most recent community engagement over the past couple of years, which resulted in, based on that engagement, kind of resulted in the boundaries and feeder patterns and some of the impacts that you're going to see, and some recommendations. So this isn't recent history, but in the 50s, we added Bothell, in the 60s, Inglemore, several schools along the way. In the 80s, we added Woodinville, and then our last school, Timbercrest, was built in '97. And also in the early 90s, the Urban Growth Boundary Act was passed, and the Urban Growth Boundary to just help mitigate growth in both in the state and in counties. And then in 2000, in early 2001, the EDTF was established, and partly to help the district plan for all the upcoming growth and changes. There was a lot of change and growth up to that point, and a lot of growth and changes that was to come. In '06, the EDTF made some boundary changes, mostly in the north end to help mitigate some of the growth that we had going on there. And then in 2012, the EDTF had worked again for a long period of time and made recommendations to the board about some more boundary changes to help implement the grade reconfiguration and a new high school. So that period of time came up, and that recommendation was approved in 2012. And since then, we've been working all through the district on implementing those things and understanding those things. And now we're here today with some final recommendations around boundary changes associated with that. On the 20-year period up to our last school being built in 1997, we averaged about one school every 17 months or so. And since then, it's been a bit of a time, and we're looking at this through a long-range, long-term lens. And 2017, we've been working for a long time to get to that point. It's just going to be a milestone because we continue on and on and on. So we haven't had much change for the last 20 years or so, and so people haven't gotten used to it like we have been in the past.
2007, is that Sorensen, Doug?
2000, no, that was just the boundary
Was that the boundary
changes
changes?
that we implemented. It was just a boundary change to mitigate that growth. We didn't have any, we didn't open any other, well, I didn't count Sorensen or SAS in these, because they weren't
So what's
major.
significant about this is, as we grew as a district, lots of growth, lots of new buildings, lots of boundary changes happening simultaneously. As a result of the economic changes and sort of the slowing the growth in, based on the urban growth boundary, as you can see, it's really made a significant difference in how we're being impacted over the next 20 years. So we think that's more like what we will be moving toward to some degree than the last 10,
Yeah,
15
this
years.
is an anomaly,
Yeah.
probably. So, one of the things that we, and there's a lot on this chart, one of the things that we look at in long-term planning, long-term focus, we have our bond cycle every 4 years. We do property acquisitions strategically when we can, at the appropriate best time we can. And then occasionally we do construction, and boundary changes come with construction. And one of the things you can see down here in the blue is the elementary growth in the past several years. And also we've mitigated that quite a bit by adding a bunch of elementary portables over that period of time. One of the other things that we try and anticipate and plan for was, for example, full day K being implemented in 2017 by the legislature, and we're anticipating K-3 class size reductions in 2018. And one of the fortunate timings and the appropriate things we're planning for is that grade reconfiguration down here in between 16 and 17. If you take those 6th graders out of those elementary schools, you have the capacity to accommodate that full day K. And then occasionally the legislature changes their direction a little bit, and they moved the full day K implementation. We're back into 2016-17, and that mitigation that would have helped, that grade reconfiguration that would have helped us, isn't helping us for 16-17. And so that's a real impact that we've tried to understand, and we're mitigating through all the changes that you've seen. As Ryan was talking about growth, on this map, the white boundary is our district boundary, the blue line across is the King Snow County line, and the green squiggly line is the urban growth boundary. And what you can see there is lots of development. This is again part of our long-term thing. We track development, and the developments come between the time that they apply for a permit and actually get built out and sold, and kids and families move in, between 1 and 6 years. And we keep track of those at different stages so we can estimate when that population might show up. But what you can see again is in our north central corridor, really hugging that urban growth boundary line, is where the bulk of the development is occurred and will continue to occur. Multi and Wellington properties that are going to help us mitigate that.
What's important to understand in this map here is because we straddle 2 jurisdictions, we have different siting requirements when you're building construction or jurisdictional requirements. The other thing that we don't get to control is the urban growth line. That's all controlled at the jurisdictional level. So King and Snohomish County will control that. The third thing that we don't get to control is the permitting application process, which again is handled at the King and Snohomish. So what we're trying to do as we look at growth is we're really trying to anticipate where the growth will continue. And if you look up along the north central part of our district, you can see that developers are just following that urban growth line. So as that urban growth line continues to move east, developers will continue to move east along that line. Okay?
What is that development out in the middle of the?
Yeah.
That's kind of a street and dreams type
Yes.
deal. They're being built on,
They built
Yeah,
a road
acreage.
down there now.
There's
There's a lot of acreage.
like 8 kids maybe.
There won't be a lot.
Yeah.
I was wondering how they got.
The
that.
the
They're all half acre.
$2.5 million starter homes.
Oh,
Okay.
well,
What,
Hey.
850?
Yeah.
So one of the things that, we're talking about mitigating and developing capacity, obviously you go for the shorter lead time, cheaper, quote, easier things first, and we've done all these kinds of things over the past few years. And then you get into longer lead, more expensive, more difficult to implement things. And like we're talking about today, the service area feeder patterns. And in 2017, we're doing that and grade reconfiguration and potentially new construction and property acquisition. So those are some of the mitigating tools that we have to our disposal. The Enrollment Demographic Task Force that I mentioned that has done all of this work has been going on since 2001. This is the existing membership of the EDTF. We've really tried to get more engagement, and we learned that over the years. And since in 2012, we had 6 community reps. Now we have 9 community reps on that committee, because those community reps have really made a huge contribution to that work and representing and helping us think differently. And lots of good people over lots of years have been working on this. I also want to, they're not on here anymore, but Katrina Rose and Kara Roth were on here as community members for 6 years, and they did a ton of work. Like I said, they're not on here now, and there's other people who aren't on here anymore that have done a ton of work over the years. But I just want to say thanks to them. Recent EDTF, we worked really hard at trying to engage the community on multiple levels and over through communications, through the website, through Larry's 100+ road shows that he did since 2013. Traffic light, he would get out and do his show. But these, we worked quite a while, the EDTF committee, on developing these considerations and making sure that they encompass
Musicians out.
Sorry. Encompass what we were trying to get, and it's a lot of work. And in April and May, we went out to the community and solicited input from the community online about these are the considerations that we're working on. Do these meet the needs? Are these important to you? These are what we think are the important things. And we really got feedback from them, and we also got working on those boundary changes based on those considerations and the community feedback we got in that spring. In February of this year, we came out with a draft, and it went out on the website, and we printed a bunch of maps and stuff. We had 5 open house events. In addition to all the community input that we got online and at board meetings and such, we went to face-to-face, and a lot of board members, you guys were out there at those community meetings, and we got a lot of input and good suggestions from those folks. And we had over 300 comments from those community, both at site and online both. And we also had updated enrollment data and new kindergarten enrollment registration data at this time by May. So we came out with another boundary draft based on all that input. And then we got a little bit more input between May and June and July, and then we come up with this final draft. We made a couple of small adjustments and then came up with this final draft.
So what we heard from the board loud and clear is we need to get more community engagement. And so this is our sort of process of trying to get community engagement. One, in developing the key considerations and criteria we're going to use to develop the boundaries. But 2, once we identified what these plans were going to be, going back out to the community and seeking additional input as far as what do you think of our plan? And we heard of a lot of what do you think of our plan. So we've tried to incorporate some of the recommendations in here, as you see the iterations from February to May to October.
And David, I don't know if either one of you were able to attend any of the open houses that occurred in February and early March, but.
David was at Buffalo.
Yes.
I did not, although I tracked the process during meetings, but
So very interactive, lots of folks from the EDTF there, lots of folks like Doug and Ryan from Support Services, our transportation folks there. So our goal was that it wouldn't be a sit and get presentation because we anticipated that people who came would come with very specific questions and interests around how did the plan directly impact them. And that having a general presentation overview probably wasn't going to meet their needs and likely might frustrate them. And so it was a lot of people talking with people, and most of the conversations were pleasant and nice. Some of them were a little more heated and pointed. But I think it was very successful in allowing people to really personally engage around what the plan means to them and to kind of understand the scope of what we were trying to accomplish as a district.
And the exception being the Spanish speaking one we did, which did have more of a.
That was more of a presentation.
Presentation, very well attended. And I'll just make a plug, because both Amy and I were able to attend the work group and
The subcommittee.
the subcommittee work group, just the unbelievable, amazing ability that they had, and they would just, they had this incredible program where they moved.
It was
the
the
street,
spreadsheet on
and then it would-
steroids that Doug made.
Yeah.
So if you went to move a pocket, it would change all the corresponding numbers by grade level.
And they went through every possible
Yeah, it was amazing.
option known to man, I think, short of flying. So they really did an amazing job. Any option that was out there, they considered it and tried it to see what happened.
So the considerations, the final considerations that really drove these changes are clumped in these categories. And we tried to, every time we were working on these pieces, we keep coming back to what do our considerations say? How can we honor these the best that we can in our work in making these boundary changes? So this is an example of between that February draft early this year and the May draft, where we got all the input from a lot of open houses and a lot of other things. And I don't expect you to read this, I'm just going to use this as an example. These were changes that we made in the February, and a couple that I'll point out is this number 3. When we got new forecasts for enrollment in that Fernwood area, or the Crystal Springs area, how dense it is up there, we had to move more of that to Frank Love. And so you'll see that as we flip through the iterations here. Also, and again, in that first period up to May, there's about a dozen changes at the elementary school levels. Here's an example of one that got a lot of traffic. At one point, we had Maywood Hills people going to Woodmore, and when we got a lot of feedback about that, a lot of comments, we went back, and that's one that we actually reversed because we were able to figure out how it was. The elementary wasn't a problem, it was at the middle school capacity that we had that issue, whether we could take those kids and keep them at the middle and high school. So those are a couple of kinds of changes, and we made several, and here's here's number 3, that those kids were in Canyon Park, they would be going to Kenmore. There's about 30 kids affected there, about 30 down here in that change. And then at the high school level, again, instead of going to North Creek, those kids in that little chunk that we were talking about would be going to Bothell. There's about 20 there. So those are the kind of changes that we made. And in between May and September, we just made a couple of small adjustments, correcting things that we had kind of missed in the earlier pieces.
So one of the significant changes between the original draft and the final draft we're presenting is that we were able to, in the final draft, everything has been aligned by elementary feeder pattern. So every elementary feeds cleanly into a high school. So 100% of the elementary ends up in a high school. We had to pick a level at which there would be breaks, where the feeder patterns would break apart a little bit and then come back together. And with now 4 high schools and 6 middle schools, that was the level where the math didn't work as cleanly. So, but we were able to clean that up in the final draft, and whether that's a benefit to people or not, it at least keeps communities intact by where they started.
So,
Yeah, we definitely heard feedback about that it doesn't matter, you know, my elementary kid doesn't need to go to school with the high school, but we had to pick. And we felt really good when we got to the point where all those elementary kids got to go back together in
it's
high
a big
school.
change, that was a big change.
Yeah.
Let me explain this, the map here, the colors. The scheme is that the dark lines are existing service areas and the shaded areas are the draft boundaries. Again, we have the King Snow line on here and that urban growth squiggle on here. So an example that we were talking about, that Crystal Springs thing. Currently Crystal Springs is this black line right up here. But that section that's blue now is part of Frank Love in the draft. So that was that one change that we just saw as an example. So those are the kind of changes, and I'm not going to go through each of them, but those are the changes that we've made, and this is where we've ended up.
And the key thing here is understanding that I think our goal was really to move kids sort of in the southeast direction. I mean, that was the space that we had
That's where it's dense and where it's less dense.
at the elementary school. And if you look at the urban growth line, it was a lot more dense on the western part of that line than the eastern part of that line. I think the other thing that is significant here, if you look at the locations of your physical building, we wanted to ensure that the building stayed in that service area. So Crystal Springs is a good example.
Seems like it.
Right, we couldn't move kids south of Crystal Springs to move them into Frank Love. We really had to try to pick an area that had some density. But we also said that if you're a walker within Crystal Springs, we wouldn't bus you. So those were some of the criteria that they really had to look at as they were shifting kids southeast. Okay? The other significant thing here that I think the subcommittee went through, as Sandy talked about, we looked at it all. We also looked at a concept called busing. What would happen if we would move kids and fill all the spaces east? What we had is we had a few kids in the north end going past 2 or 3 elementary schools before they landed at their home school. And I think what we talked about was, that's probably not what's best for kids. Okay?
So the boundary plan will not equalize enrollment across all schools.
Yes.
It will better balance enrollment, but it will not equalize enrollment across the schools. And one of the main comments that I think came out of particularly the last round of feedback was simply proximity of school to where somebody lives. So for example, Crystal Springs is a great example. It is now on the very southern border of its service area. And so you get feedback from people who say, well, I'm much farther away from Shelton View. Why do I go to Shelton View and not Crystal Springs? Well, it's simply because of where population is relative to where schools are. And we have that dynamic right now. Fernwood is a good example right now of a school that essentially is really close to its southern
Border.
service area border. It's just that this is a new dynamic for some folks, and so that was it's difficult.
So similarly, you know, like Ryan was saying, trying to keep that capacity, and so at the middle school, same thing applies. Though that Crystal Springs section, the kids we were talking about right there, that island, they're keeping them together. They're going to Cunmore with the other Frank Love kids.
Yeah.
Cunmore.
Yeah.
Thank you. Cunmore. Thank you. And at the high school level, same thing. And like Brian's saying, you know, we're trying to scooch kids to where the capacity is at elementary school, keep balance at the middle school so we have the right numbers of kids in the middle school facilities. And at the same time, we've added a new high school way up there. All the existing high schools are in the south end in King County below the line, and the area of most rapid growth and most density is up there, and that's where the high school went. Now we have to move those high school kids back up north. We're taking the north end of Bothell and north end of Woodinville and putting those kids up there. And it's, you know, and at the same time, keeping those cohorts together, elementary cohorts together, balancing the middle schools, and having the right balance and numbers of kids at the high schools to sustain 4 grades over a long period of time. So that was the balancing act. Like Larry said, this is the existing feeder pattern. We had, you know, nice, even, relatively even stuff. We had a couple of elementary splits, like these Shelton View kids went to Kenmore, and they went off to Inglemore, and these Shelton View kids went to Canyon Park and went to Bothell. In the proposed feeder pattern, we still have a couple of elementary splits. Those Crystal Springs kids, for example, they'll go to Canyon Park, but they'll come back to North Creek with the rest of those kids. Same thing over there, so that kids coming to, you know, if you were all together at elementary, would be together at high school in these plans. So we're trying to estimate how many kids are impacted by some of this, and we've talked about this for some time. Grade reconfiguration impacts, which are essentially natural changes or normal transitions between an elementary and a middle school or junior high and high school. There's about 1,800 kids in 2017 with this draft that were 6th graders, are 6th graders, and they'll be in a middle school instead of elementary school, and about 1,700 kids who are 9th graders who will be in a high school instead of a junior high or middle school. So that's about 3,500 kids that are being impacted through a natural, regular transition. Then there are also transitions associated with the boundary changes. And so in 2017, there'll be about 1,200 kids, K-5, will be in a different elementary school than they would have been with no boundary changes. About 700 middle school kids in a different place, and about 1,600 9th through 12th graders, about 1,300 of those 16 is going to North Creek. And as well, and I don't have any number on here yet, but there are kids that in the past year or two, since 2014-15, I think, the kindergarten kids that we've moved from from their, let's say, their home school to another school, that's a transition. That's not a, quote, natural transition between those levels. So there's a few more kids that are going to be impacted that way. So here's a little detail on those boundary change transitions. This is elementary school. Here's the Crystal Springs that we were talking about. There's about 260 K-5 kids in that set, in all of Crystal Springs that would be going to Frank Love. And these are the impacts by school. At elementary school, middle school.
You want to go back there?
Sure.
And then you can see down below, there's about 120 current Frank Love kids going to Shelton View. So
Yeah,
that's an
it's
example
that
of
ripple
the
effect.
shift south.
Right.
Do we have any idea how many of those Crystal Spring kids to Frank Love are currently going to Frank Love for kindergarten?
We can have that.
We don't, that's part of what we're trying to research right now.
Because that would be a extra transition for those
Right,
kids.
it'd be nice if they were.
We're working on it.
Perfect.
Okay, at the middle school level, about 700 kids in a different building than they would have expected. Again, that 125 from Skyview is mostly those Crystal Springs kids and stuff. And then at the high school level, again, the bulk of North Creek is coming from Bothell. That first year, again, that's 9 through 11. And about 270, 300 kids from Woodinville for those 1,600 kids changing at high school level.
And the 310 from Inglemore to Bothell, that's essentially the Lockwood Elementary, it's Lockwood feeder pattern, Lockwood Elementary School that currently goes to Inglemore now. That school shifts entirely to the Bothell feeder pattern.
Right. So the recommendations that the EDTF is bringing is consider implementing these changes in boundaries and feeder patterns, and address the Maltby site. The board approved this summer about getting ready for something in the 2018 bond at the Maltby site. But the other recommendations are still valid, or they're still there, and is continue to look for and acquire property where needed, and continue to anticipate and analyze the data associated with potential legislative changes or a jurisdictional change is associated with the UGA or something like that. So keep processing that. And like Brian keeps reminding me, this 2017 is a big milestone, and it's a milestone. In January, the EDTF is getting back together, and we're talking about, okay, what's next with the next level of planning, and that'll just continue and continue and continue. So this is an ongoing effort, has been for some time. Any questions?
I've got 2 questions.
Sure.
So one question is, I'm just gonna call it, for the lack of a better term, the platypus question.
The what?
Platypus. So you have this transition from some kids going from 4 schools in 4 years. And so some of the feedback I've heard is that that's that question. And to support, and I know that you're looking at the transitions, and so coming up with this mixed logo, so you're gonna go from being a cougar to a snake to a eagle to a Viking or something like that. And I wonder one way of making that transition exciting is for having the kids to maybe have t-shirts or hats or a stuffed animal or something like that. You know, we're making this transition, we're excited about it, and so here's a way to embrace that. And I know you have thoughts about that, but that's just...
Well, we're getting bling for the North Creek High.
Yeah.
We are,
So-
and they've talked to us about,
Which kind of bling they want?
no, they want to trade in 2 for 1.
Yeah.
So give 2 bottles.
Those are discussions.
Yeah, they are. I don't think
Give a
we've
t-shirt on a
necessarily
lanyard.
thought of that granular a level, but I know one of the things that we're thinking about for certain is, once the boundary plan is finalized, we can sort of go from the kind of theoretical numbers of this many students moving from one school community to another, to actually extracting who those students are, who those families are at a very granular level, and giving all of that information to schools, both who's leaving, who's coming, and then schools begin to partner up with one another around those comings and goings to try and smooth that pathway as best they can. We anticipate that there will be parents who will want to start getting involved, perhaps in PTA of schools that they'll be at. There may be students who, in schools that can still accept waivers or have room, who may want an early waiver in 16, 17 to jumpstart that process. So it's very much on our minds.
And I would add that in our task force, our elementary reconfiguration task force, you might want to check
And
those
middle
minutes,
school
and
and
middle
high
school
school.
and high school. Transitions is a huge topic, and we are brainstorming those kinds of things, making recommendations now about what every elementary school is going to do.
Right.
In common across the district, so kids get a common experience, what could be left up to the building to make their own, and those are very real ideas with, well, our PTA is gonna cross-populate for 16, 17, so we, have some joint current meeting, that kind of thing, so communities get to exchange that whole year ahead of time, which is another reason this is so important tonight, is that we can launch those things, so all next year we can be transitioning and building those experiences. I think it'll go a lot smoother for those families and kids.
The other thing too that gets lost a little bit, and not to diminish the students who may be making multiple transitions in multiple years, but in most cases, that last transition, students end up at a place where they're going to be for a number of years, whether it's the 3 years of middle school or the 4 years of high school. So they may be 3 schools in 3 years or 4 schools in 4 years, but when they hit that 4th year, they're staying. They're pretty stable there for the rest of that level, as they would be in the old system.
At the middle school and high school, we know that there will be 2 groups of kiddos coming in. Both the 6th and 7th will be new at the middle school, and the 9th and 10th will be new at the high school. So we're gearing up for web and link. So our crews, and we know we're going to need probably double the resources. If I think about the link coordinators, probably 2, and the same with web, because we're going to have to think about 2 groups of kids at each level coming in. And they're going to get a t-shirt, and they're going to be designed, they'll be, I think something pretty cool for each school, and probably each level. Who was pink this year? Hot pink, was that Crest or somebody?
Was it?
Yeah, So, they design the t-shirts and get things ready, so.
I think the one thing we talked about in EDTF as well as all the other task forces is the transition implementation, that's gonna be key to our success.
Which is
So-
detailed a bit more in the report.
Yeah, so, one of the things we kind of talked about is if we can get this proposal finalized, then we can start moving forward with our work as far as what the next steps. We've already started to talk about that in EDTF.
Right.
What does the transition look like? How do we communicate this out now with the community as far as the transitioning? What input do we want to gather from the community as far as what's best to transition? So I think that's part of the next steps for us, once we sort of finalize this boundary proposal.
I would say too, it's, not all the transitions are necessarily going to be perceived as negative by kids and families. I mean, I think Eric McDowell is doing an excellent job exciting the students who are going to be going to North Creek High School. As I was recently at Lockwood Elementary and I was talking with Gary Keeler, the principal there, so what he's hearing from his parent community. And many of them are saying, it's made sense to us for a long time that our kids should go to Bothell. So we're actually, sort of makes sense, it makes sense to us. So there definitely will be some communities, I think Crystal Springs is probably a good example, or some elements of Crystal Springs where there's perhaps a sense of loss, but that's not the universal sentiment. So there's a lot of positive to build from.
But we are looking at open houses this spring, and not around at 5, with real, with the maps being stable, and then having our teams work together, grid reconfiguration teams and EDTF to answer questions and, to be there for resources for parents who want to see, well, what's the school like? What's the pathway like? And so we're very aware of the outreach that we want to do.
Great. And then the second question was the building in the outside the UGA in Snohomish County. That's not just subject to zoning at the site, or is it allowed or disallowed, or what's the?
So why don't we go back up to the map? So currently, right now, if you look at the North Creek High School, and if you look at the urban growth line, we are developing on what we would say, the wrong side of, the wrong side of the UGA. So we're allowed, yeah, so we're allowed to develop there. In King County, it's very restrictive. It tells you exactly that you cannot develop outside of the urban growth. In Snohomish County, they sort of have a little bit of flexibility to work with you. So as you can see, we started that process with Snohomish County on our North Creek High School. The goal is then to continue with Maltby to go through some type of planning process with them.
And when we voted just a little while ago, that was sort of to give you permission to start that process with
Yeah,
the county.
yeah, so the vote was for us to start moving with the planning process.
Like we did with North.
Real similar to what we did with North Creek High School. So the way the law, I guess the code law is written today is that it says discourages, it doesn't say you can't,
For secondary
for secondary schools.
schools.
Right. In King County, for all schools,
You can.
you can.
Thank you.
Which is why I think as we went through this process of trying to secure the property, we knew we had to stay in Snohomish County to even have a chance to develop the property.
So the idea is that should we go out for a bond in 2018, we can say to the community, we've already gotten the yes.
Approval,
The sites.
permitting, I mean, the whole goal is by the time you approve your bond, real similar to what we did in 2014 for North Creek High School, we're just rolling with the construction.
And when does this come to the board for a vote?
So we intend to bring the plan for first reading in January, first meeting in January, and then second reading and hopeful board action and approval the second meeting in January. So really between now and then, our goal would be to push out the final plan again. There's just a few updates we need to make to the boundary locator, you know, where people can go in and type in their address and see where they'll end up being. But push that out again so people can re-access that information and see where they're at. Certainly want to make sure that as the board, you're comfortable with at whatever level of detail you want to dive into the plan and its implications. But it is a big decision, so it is a 2-reading type of decision. We had initially anticipated this as being maybe a March, April type of thing when we were doing our timelines a couple of years ago, and then as we've gotten closer, one, we're just sort of, we're ready, I think, to take action on this. We've processed it enough, but two, there are all kinds of other good reasons why taking action now, getting certainty around this helps us in other arenas, whether it's start time task force or the transition work or
The waiver process.
waiver process.
So
all
waiver
those
process,
things.
time task, I'm just, wait, how many things are linked to this? Transition planning,
Reconfiguration.
Well, all three of
And task forces.
All 3 of the task forces
with
with,
HR too.
With
yes,
staff.
staffing
assignments,
is part of that as well.
Yeah.
As well as waiver process, so we could mitigate to some degree. Those kids that, for instance, are at Frank Love now in kindergarten, could they waive in to be first graders next year for some way, shape, or form? Because Crystal Springs might have to move some first graders, so they wouldn't have to come back to Crystal Springs and then go back to Frank Love a year later. But all of that's dependent on, that's really where the boundary is, so.
So I would say as I've been out in schools, I've asked every single, and I've been to all of one school for, you know, hour and a half sit-downs with principals this year, and I asked all of them, what are you hearing out there? And it's all pretty quiet, although they all feel like their school committees are all informed and aware of what's going on, but it's really been pretty quiet, and I think that that's, my optimistic reading of that is we've done a really good job of informing people of what's going on, of getting them engaged, and even if the plan may not necessarily meet their needs, I think people who've really been concerned about that, they've had the opportunity to engage with the right folks to understand why the plan has come about the way that it has. And so, you know, boundary adjustments can be really traumatic experiences for school districts, and not to say that this one, you know, is going to be a slam dunk easy. We've still got a lot of work to do, but I think we've really done a nice job, Ryan and crew and the EDTF and community volunteers like Stacy of putting together a really thoughtful process that's produced a really good product. And certainly anybody in the north end of the district who either doesn't have kindergartners in their schools or has schools that are way larger than they should be understands that something has to happen.
Keep in mind, there'll be the one parent on September 3rd, 2017 that will go, what? My kid's going where?
Yes.
Well, I didn't say we find
It's not 100%.
we didn't find a way to overcome human nature, but I think we.
Exactly right.
I think what the other thing that we want to just really stress with the board is this is something that we've been working on since 2006.
Yeah.
So remember we started the boundary change in 2006. It sort of got us to what we thought would be around 2010. The EDTF then worked on a recommendation for 2012. Now we're getting to actualize in 2017 the recommendation from 2012, and it will just sort of continue in that sort of, as Doug said, this is just a milestone. EDTF will continue to look at the enrollment changes and demographics of the district and really look at how do we continue to maximize and utilize all of our facilities.
I just want to say from where I've seen it a couple iterations, and we had the onboarding orientation, David and I just think that we can legitimately say we heard you. Even if we can't accommodate you, we heard you. And for some people, the best we can do is lots of transition supports. For other people, we've really done a lot of those things. And I think that's what really matters to folks. And so I think and there's so much evidence that that's actually happened. And so we may not have been able to accommodate, we've heard you, we'll do everything we can to help you transition. I think that's great.
Good.
Anything else we can help answer? So leave, I just wanna, really thank Stacy and.
Yes,
absolutely.
They spent a
Yes.
lot of
Oh my
time. Yeah. Leanna for really helping us organize this whole outreach to the community. I think it was a really good team effort, and we'll sort of continue on that journey because she doesn't have a choice. She has 2 more years. We'll continue on that journey.
So the open house, you guys mentioned about, helping people with transitions. Do you have rough time frame? March?
We talked
April?
about
Yeah, I think
March,
it's in our
April.
report.
It's in March, yes.
In March, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think real similar to what we did in the last open house, right
Yes.
around March is what we talked about,
Right.
going out for the 5 open houses.
Yeah.
And what were those 5 locations?
It's
It's
four
like
pathways.
Bothell, Woodinville, Inglemoor, Skyview, and then Woodmore for the Spanish one. Spanish.
Page 10 in this report has
We don't
draft,
have specific days because Bothell.
draft sites
Oh.
and
Oh,
But
timeframes.
not draft dates yet.
Oh, we
Well,
don't.
potential dates.
We have potential dates, but
Oh, so-
Bothell needed a reschedule
Oh, okay.
because we had a conflict on that day, so I didn't put the specific dates in.
We're just trying to confirm everything.
Okay.
Wait, I'm confused. So the near-term milestones, that's
That's-
2016?
Old.
Oh, that's,
That was the
okay.
previous ones.
No, I was looking, did we remove that from this?
Oh, so this is 2015 dates?
No,
That's
it's,
2015.
it's on page 12, in the
Well.
3rd paragraph, second sentence.
Oh, we made it into a paragraph.
I
got it.
Yeah.
Okay, but
I
not
gotta
specific.
delete all that from my calendar.
Correct.
But we were having challenges with Bothell High.
Yes, Bothell High had a conflict.
Yeah, but
There's something about
They get a new
Down in school.
Great. Anything else? And welcome to your guys' first study session.
Made it painless. So,
I think Lockwood is entertaining.
yeah, help
Yeah.
yourself to
Have some more
get a bite to eat so you're all energized for the rest of the meeting and then make it out into the foyer.
I think it's Lockwood, that's what I heard earlier. So Lockwood is here. Yes.
Well, you're the router.